So my name is Alan Glickenhouse. I'm the API business strategist for IBM. Great job I have. I get to go out and talk to businesses about what you can do with APIs. Sometimes it's just a brief chat. Sometimes it's a workshop we can do, a day or two kind of thing. And as was just said, I also write a lot. So when I'm not traveling to conferences or visiting you all, I write a lot of blogs and papers and things like that because I want to share the information that I'm getting with a wide audience. So in the next half an hour or less, I'm going to talk about creating an API economy business strategy and governance model. And at the end of this session, you will know everything you need to know about that topic. And if you believe that, as we say in New York, I have a bridge to sell you, right? So this is a very lengthy topic. I'm going to give you the flyby version of it with pointers to a lot of other places where I've written about this topic. So the way I tend to create these kinds of content is I start getting questions from people that I'm visiting, and they say, can you tell me about creating a business strategy for APIs? And so after you hear that a few times, you think to yourself, well, maybe this is something I should write about. So what I did was I thought about what goes into a business strategy for anything. And I just started to come up with a list of topics. So establishing and prioritizing goals and creating methods and procedures and organizational impact and governance models and architecture and some technical stuff and various other things. And when I looked at that list, I said, well, okay, I've written about some of these already, but not all of them. So let me finish off the list. And I did that. And I created a whole series of blogs, which I will point you to at the end, that basically go through this. And every one of the slides that is in this presentation could probably be a half an hour session on its own, right? So we're going to do the flyby version here. I have a half an hour, now 27 minutes with you. And so I encourage you to come up to me at the rest of the event here. I'm going to be here for the drinks afterward and for all day tomorrow, and let's have a conversation. And certainly reach out to me afterward as well if you want to. So one of the first things that I ask a business when I go in to talk to them about APIs, and you might think this is kind of an odd question from a company that sells an API platform solution, is why? Why are you doing this? You know, is it just because everybody else is doing it? I mean, if you can't answer the question why, then we got to stop right now, right? So this may be the most important thing that people can come up with an answer. And I don't mean, you know, from a technical perspective, but from a business perspective. Why are you doing this? Why are you going to invest money in creating APIs for your business? And if you don't know the answer, then any road will get you there. And let me tell you, I see a lot of businesses who don't know the answer to this question. You know, the answer is, well, we have APIs and we want to expose them, or something like that, but not what the business goal is going to be. And so to move us forward here today, I thought I'd throw a few of them up there on the screen for businesses that do know why they're trying to do this. And often it's time to market, it's partnering, it's making money, it's competitors doing something. All very good reasons to do it, but I don't know is a bad answer, right? So the first thing we have to do is understand why. And you may have some other ideas as well. What I've done in looking at the combinations of answers that I've gotten over the years of doing this is boil it down to really 4 business drivers. So I think I did a session on this at one conference just on the 4 business drivers. And so I'm going to do it quickly here. First one is speed. Okay, so many businesses are looking to solve the age-old problem that we have tried to solve in IT forever of the business wants something now, and IT says 6 months, 12 months, some unacceptable amount of time, right? And historically, what we've done to solve that problem is try to make IT run faster. So we do things like raise the level of, you know, programming languages. We raise the level that people work at with service-oriented architecture. Bad word, I know. We do business process management. We do all kinds of things to get IT to run faster. You will never get IT to run as fast as the business wants, because when they come asking you for something, they really want it now. And now is never going to be something that IT can do with keeping the business running, right? They have to keep the systems up and running. So how do we bridge this gap? And the answer is APIs. So one of the big drivers that I'm seeing in the marketplace, and typically one of the first ones that businesses focus on, is this speed to market. By enabling the assets that you have inside the company to be exposed for business developers to use at the time they want to use them, we start to address this conflict that we've had in a different way. We're not trying to get IT to change the back-end systems faster. We're trying to let the business do what they want to do faster. So this is the first business driver. Second one is reach. Reaching new customers, reaching new markets. Every business I talk to would like to have more business. Right? I want more customers, I want to get out there, I want to get my offerings in front of other people. And so this typically comes into a partnering kind of a scenario, channels, social media, a lot of different use cases. I'll talk more about use cases in a few minutes. But getting your offerings in front of customers where they are, who are not coming to you to find your offerings already. Third one is innovation. Sometimes around Internet of Things, but not necessarily. The idea of innovation and the new focus I'm dealing with this year, more so than previously, is digital transformation, right? And digital transformation wants to encourage innovation. And how do I encourage innovation if it takes a lot of time and money and effort to change the back-end systems to try something? So I need the ability to innovate at low risk, low cost. And so some of the mechanisms that we have in the API and microservice area allow us to do this. I'm not going to be able to get into the detail on that in this session today, but come up and chat with me. And the fourth one is domains. Domains is a name I should have picked a different name for, but basically it means sharing assets throughout the company. So it may be multiple lines of business that each are doing their own thing, but we can have a benefit by sharing information across the lines of business. It may be geographic things, like we have a location here in the US, and we have one in Europe, and we have one in Asia, and they each work independent of one another, but we all need to report into a common large company, right? So the domains thought. Now, the previous chart that I showed you had lots of other ones, like making money and competitive threats and all those other ones. You can really map those into these four, right? Making money is, you do that by reaching more customers, by getting to market faster, by innovating with new things, right? So you can kind of map all the other ones into these four, and that's pretty much to keep it, contained. I've done that. The other topic, and I'm presenting on this in 2 weeks as a whole topic, is monetization. So I've written a white paper on this. You can find it at the link at the bottom here. I'll give you, this has already been given to the conference. They will get you all the links and everything like that. But monetization is a challenging topic. It does not mean charging for APIs, okay? So if you think it means somebody's going to pay you for your APIs, you're really limiting your view of what monetization means. Monetization means making money through the use of APIs, okay? And Gartner says that, Forrester says that, and pretty much everybody I talk to says it. But as soon as I get done talking to customers about this, they go, okay, but how do I charge for my APIs, right? So that is a business model. It's the second column here where developer pays, but it's not the only one. And there are a lot of interesting models that will make you a tremendous amount more money than the developer paying you for a small amount of money for each API call that they make. In fact, how often is API calls the right metric for a business relationship? More often than not, it's about the value of the transaction that you're doing with the other business than it is about the number of times that they invoke you. Right? So again, a topic we can get into in a lot more detail. The next thing I wanted to breeze through here is use cases. So we have lots of potential use cases, and again, to boil this down into something containable, I've come up with 7 categories of use cases that I think about when I'm going in to meet with a business. If I'm going to come meet with you, before I show up, I'm going to do research on your company, and I'm going to come up with sample APIs that you might do in these 4, and the next page has 3 more categories of use cases. And so you think about what do businesses do with APIs to meet those 4 business drivers that we just talked about. They have mobile or web user interface type things that they're doing. They have social media type things. They have data and analytics type things that they're doing. The other category is, I did this with Forrester when we worked on something together. They boiled it down to industry standards, regulatory requirements, audit, security, those kinds of things all fit into the other category. Now, what you see on this page each one of these categories say the word internal in front of them. What that means is that the audience for the APIs is somebody inside your company. Okay, so many businesses will start with these. In particular, mobile and data tend to be the two biggest that I'm seeing, that companies will start with internal APIs for their own developers to do something. Internal does not mean that the traffic is inside your enterprise. Mobile app traffic is coming from outside your enterprise, right? So just be aware that it just means that the developer is inside, not the traffic. The next three categories, partnering, probably in my mind the biggest category that we're going to have in the long run of API economy. By reaching out to third parties and getting your offerings in front of other people, you can multiply your revenue tremendously. And so this is a big deal. And then public APIs, again, we all talk about public APIs. I think it's been referenced several times by several speakers here today. A small percentage of the APIs in the world are public APIs. That's okay. More and more will be there over time, and it tends to be something that happens later in the cycle because companies try to start with internal first and then move on to partnering and then public. And then the last category, which doesn't apply always, is device APIs and wearables, IoT, that kind of thing. So I would do research, and link at the bottom here again to the 4 business drivers and 7 use case series that I wrote, so you can get more on all of that. All right, let's start to think about governance a little bit. So domain ownership. One of the things that we think about in the API space that I have discussions with is about who owns the API. And many companies, especially when you're dealing with the ones that have the multiple line of business domain scenario, have multiple domain owners. And each one of the organizations or lines of business wants to own their own APIs. And so having domain ownership discussions and how that's going to work is very important. And I'm realizing I'm going way too long on each one of these slides. So domain ownership is a topic to talk about. Roles and responsibilities. I was thrilled to see earlier the ADP presentation where the person who was standing up here said, I'm an API product manager. I don't know how many people I've ever seen that stood up and said that, but that is a critical role to the success of an API initiative. And so many initiatives that I see are trying to do it with an API developer, also a very important role, but not the same role, who's creating the APIs. The app developer, of course, is the one who's consuming the APIs, and the operations person that's there as well. This API product manager role is critical. And so if you are an API developer and you write APIs, you create APIs technically, does that mean that you know the marketplace for the API or that you're going to take the time to communicate out to the world that they should use the API? That's not your role. That's the API product manager role. So you need to get somebody into that role. From an organizational structure perspective, the picture I like to run around with is this one. Your initiative should be a combination of business and IT. Too many of the initiatives that I'm talking to are IT only. And so when I was in Singapore 2 weeks ago, the number one question I was asked by all the attendees is, how do I get the business on board? How do I talk to the business about getting on board? And some of the content I'll show you at the end will help you with that. But you need an API initiative owner. You need the business product manager role, which are business roles who are talking to the outside world about what we want to accomplish here. And then, of course, we need the technical roles to develop the APIs and do the operations and things like that. So put together the full picture. Now, in my life in IBM, I've done governance things for quite a while. And so this is my latest version of doing governance on things. And I like this statement, right? Governance should make it easy to do things the right way and hard to do things the wrong way. Think about that. I mean, if I make it hard to do it always, right, this is not successful, right? That's called bureaucracy, right? If you just put checkpoints everywhere that everybody has to come to a meeting and we all have to agree on, that's going to just slow everything down. You want to have processes that if they're doing what you want them to do, things flow right through. There is no issue. Everything just happens correctly. It's only when they want to go outside of what you want to do that they have an escalation path or something that slows them down and gets in the way, right? So as you're thinking about governance processes, think about how can I make this easy for people to do what I want them to do and hard for them to do what I don't want them to do, right? That is something that you really should focus on to be successful here. Now, from a more stuff to think about perspective, we can talk about API identification and best practices in that area. Versioning has come up, I think, several times today already. I've heard versioning discussions. Again, something we can talk about. Security, of course, is critical. We already talked about monetization. I also wrote articles on privacy and legal. Legal is the winning blog that I wrote. The #1 least read article I ever wrote in my life was on legal. So go out and read that one. Let's drive up some numbers. So just enough governance is also a key thought point. You're going to build this initiative over time. Don't expect to do everything at the beginning. So as you start with internal APIs, as you're doing this internal audience, lighter control on API identification and versioning. Learn what works, learn what doesn't work, and then iterate on it, right? Typically, your monetization is going to be a chargeback model internally, probably not real money flowing around, right? Monetization comes later, so you don't have to worry about that. From an enforcement perspective for rate limits and things like that, maybe you'll have soft limits for the internal one. You want to know when they're hitting certain limits, but you don't necessarily need to cut them off. You just need to know that I'm going to need more capacity to do that. But when you get outside into the real world, then you need to kind of cut things off if it's going to start to overflow your systems. So think about that as well. From a technical considerations perspective, again, lots of things we can talk about here. I just want to hit on a couple of them. I mentioned earlier the idea of internal developers does not mean internal traffic. And so your mobile app is sending traffic from the outside world, and you want to make sure that the security aspects are controlled in the DMZ before you get inside the enterprise. If you're not controlling the traffic before it gets in the enterprise, then they're in the trusted zone already, and that's a bad thing. Okay, so just a word to the wise there about security. From a scalability perspective, our newest version of the product is a totally microservice architected product. It allows you to scale up independently every single aspect of the product. So think about, the number of API calls is one metric that may need to scale, but the number of users is another one, right? And the number of API developers is another one, and analytics. So as things need to scale, having that capability is important. And then finally, flexibility. You may think you're going to do everything on Amazon today, and then tomorrow you get a great deal from Azure or IBM or whoever else, Google, you name it. So locking yourself into one cloud is a bad idea. So you want the flexibility to be able to deploy anything you want, anywhere you want. And so that gives you strength in your APIs and where you're going to deploy them. So think about all these things as you're thinking about creating your APIs. So for this room, you don't need this, okay? But when you go home, there are people who don't know the difference between an API and a microservice and a service. I don't know how many times I've had this discussion, okay? You will have this discussion. So here's some content that just talks about the difference between an API and a microservice and a service, and I've written this and discussed it to my, just an unbelievable amount of times. So, some content you can use to have this discussion at home. So if you build it, they will come. Does not work. And there was a great session earlier today about creating communities, which is fantastic. You could do everything else right in your initiative. And if you don't communicate that you have great APIs that solve this problem to the right audience so that they use it, and that goes for internal audiences as well, it's not going to be successful. You have to communicate. And so this is, again, coming back to that API product manager role. That person needs to understand the marketplace and drive the creation of the APIs, but then on the back end, after the API is created, drive the usage of that API. Right? They have to be like a salesperson for the API and get out there and market this API. And for internal channels, that may be lunch and learns. For partners, you do different things, and then maybe public, you do things like put it on programmable web and all that. But communication is absolutely key. Measuring success. This is another one that we talk about a lot in the workshops. So what does success mean? Is it the number of times somebody is calling your API? Is it the number of users of your API? Or is it money? You know, what is the metric that is the right metric to measure for your different definition of what success is going to mean? I'm not going to tell you the answer to that. I mean, it depends probably on the API. Even within your business, you may have different metrics that matter, right? But you need metrics that you can report on this. And the other thing that this is important for is keeping the initiative going. If you can't prove to management that this is being successful in some way, then they're going to say, well, why are we doing this, right? So it's critical to have these analytics that expose the answers to this question. Finally, vitality. So as I said earlier, do not expect to get this all right up front, right? This is the kind of thing where you iterate over and over and get better at it and do more and more. So you start with internal, probably with one project, and then you'll do another internal project, and then maybe you'll do an existing partner kind of a scenario, and then it'll be partner onboarding, which is a big set of scenarios, and then maybe finally some public APIs. So, you know, don't wait until you know all the answers to get going on this. Too many companies that I talk to, especially with the old IT, central IT kind of mentality of, I want to know how everything is going to work before I do anything, you know, is just not going to be successful here. This is all about speed. I just spoke about this in Singapore. This was the one slide that I did as a half-an-hour session there. This is a journey map, we called it. It's a maturity model for the API economy. I wrote this a little while ago. We talked about 5 stages of maturity that we defined across business and technology dimensions. So there's 6 different dimensions there, and each of the dimensions has 4 or 5 different factors. The way this works is we didn't define technical things you do. We defined the way a business works at these different levels of maturity. And so this is how a business would behave in these different aspects at each level. And then you move between the levels by doing things with technology and people and process and architecture and things like that. My management was very upset with me that I didn't list my product name in any of the boxes, but you use the product to move between these things, not to be at a certain level. Like here's where you install the product is not in there, right? But this is something that is available again to you through some of the blogs that we talk about, and also as a service offering if you want IBM to come in and help you with it. So I actually picked up speed too fast there, but I have a couple of last things to share with you. So executive and business backing, it's absolutely critical. The ones of these that I see that are IT only, in fact, backing up to this is IT only, right? Back here. When you move into these areas, you're starting to get the business as a partner in this. When you move to the next level here, this is a business-led initiative. Think about the web. Many of you probably were not around in the 90s. I was when the web hit. The first websites that were out there were owned by IT. They decided what would go up on the website. There was no transactions. There was no nothing. It said, here's where we're located, or call us at this phone number, and that was it. And then over time, the business and IT started to work together to put things on the website. And then finally, the business now is deciding what's on the website. IT just does it, right? And so this is what we're going to see in the API world as well. We are starting with the IT world driving APIs. We're going to move to the business and IT working together. Then we're going to move to business-led. And then we're going to move to an ecosystem and that kind of thing afterwards. So that's where this is going, and that's what the maturity model talks about. So establish your strategy and goals, roles and responsibilities, and communication. Critical success factors, I think I hit on these 3 already. I'm going to spend the last few minutes taking you through what I write about. So this is our developer site community. If you go out to developer.ibm.com/API Connect and you click on blog, you'll get to all the blogs that all of us write in IBM, not just me. And there's a lot of other things here. In fact, you can also try our product from this site, sign up to try it out as well. I'm going to show you now the next 3 pages of links. So all of these are different things that I hope you will use for your benefit in your API initiatives. So this first link here is everything I've written. And so in like chronological order from the most current backward, this is the one I just wrote like most recently, and you know they're in various categories here beside that. The first 100 that I wrote were in here. I'm now up to about 130 or so. I haven't been updating that. But I talked to somebody here at the conference about, you know, what about if I'm just starting, right? What about basics? What if I need to educate somebody who comes onto the team, talk to management, that kind of thing, get the business involved? These are all great for that, right? As you start to position this with digital business, digital transformation, there's a whole bunch of stuff here, right? So why become a digital business? Some of the things I've been writing about, I didn't get time to talk about it in this session, is about that innovation thought that I mentioned as one of the business drivers, and how do you drive innovation in a systematic approach? Again, something I'd be happy to chat with you all about while we're here this week. I'll start with this column here. This is this presentation in lengthy form, right? So everything from creating an API economy strategy, governance, organizational structure, best practices, one of my favorites, 7 biggest mistakes companies make, on through the business drivers and use cases, and then the journey map and the legal department right here. Click on that. This side here is business and value. So business wants to see an ROI. We did some ROI studies. There's all kinds of things there to help you with justification for it. And again, something I wrote beginning of this year about state of the API economy. I think that's a good one to read as well. Last page gets into the architecture, technology, things like that. A little bit more product-oriented stuff here. And this, probably one of my most popular things that I did was use cases. So for every industry, hopefully you can find your industry up in that list. There's a blog there that talks about API use cases in your industry for the 7 categories of use cases that I talked about earlier in this presentation.